So, some practical issues to think about when you're clearing the property. First of all, you may need to get a warrant. It's not unusual for you to get a notification of a property, and this is just something I would give as advice to all of you. Is often when you get a call about this, it's an unspecified problem or very clearly articulated an unclearly articulated problem which one of the neighbours has rung you about, and so they're concerned because, for instance, the neighbour may not have been out for a very long time, or they may have peeked in the window and noticed that things haven't been cleaned for a while and there's an accumulation of rubbish. Or it may be that they've noticed that the bins haven't been put out for a very long while. All of these things where you get these sort of non-specific problems, someone rings up with non-specific problems, then it's worth going to the property and taking a look. Because often these are people that are have regressed into their property and they've stopped looking after themselves and their property, and they may have a good outward appearance, but the state of their property can be gradually deteriorating along with their own psychological state of well-being within the property, and most likely their health as well. And so it's worth following up when you get these non-specific notifications of problems from a well-meaning neighbour, or possibly even a nosy one, and going around the property and having a good look through the windows and things like that. And net curtains are a real nuisance for this because they're hard to see through, but persist, open letterboxes and have a look in, that sort of thing, just if you can't get them to answer the door, that is, and try to find out what's going on in the property. If you think you've got problems there, then you may need to get a warrant to inspect. If you do need to get a warrant, be aware that when you apply for the warrant is only good until you've satisfied the purpose of that warrant. So if you apply for a warrant to inspect the property, then you're going to need to apply for a totally separate warrant to be able to do the works in default if it comes to doing those. So you may need to go for the warrant twice. There's a whole load of separate stuff about warrants which should be dealt with in a completely different part of your learning. So once you've got into the property, let's say you're having to do a works in default, then you're going to need to use a specialist commercial cleaner. And you're the only one, you as the environmental health officer are the only one who has got the powers to go into this property. What you can do is to take other people with you. So that means that when the commercial cleaners go in, you're going to have to go in with them. And whilst they're getting on with the cleaning, then you're going to have to sit around with a good book and some PPE on in order to be there at the property so that they can access it and do their cleaning and do their works in default. And when they're in the property, they're going to need to do a lot of sifting through the waste, because in amongst the what is usually piles and piles of stored detritus, there will be items which are of value to the occupier or the owner of the property. And so you've got to make sure that they sift those out and they're only throwing away the waste, which means the whole thing can take days to clear. And it can often require as much as 20 skips to clear the waste away. Whilst you're doing this, use PPE, which is typically a paper suit, and bags over your shoes. I would suggest wellies and then elastic bands on the wellies. And I would also suggest, if you go into one of these without PPE on, then spraying the bottom of your trousers and your shoes with biting insect spray is a very good idea to stop things jumping onto the bottom of your trousers. Also have some bin liners at all times in the back of your car so that you can dump all of your gear into it, because if you've got things like cat feces that's been rubbed into the carpet, then it smells absolutely dreadful, and you do not want that getting over the floor in your car. The property may have structural or electrical problems, so be very cautious as you move around these premises. And just be so when you've got through the premises, beware that through this and through the clean-up, and even when speaking to the initial person that put in the service request, you have to respect the privacy of the person that you're dealing with. They may so the person that you're dealing with is likely to be a human being. Well, it's guaranteed to be a human being. It's likely to be a human being who has nobody to turn to and nobody to support them. And the last few that I had, one was a nurse, another one was a taxi driver, another one worked for the Crown Prosecution Service, and so it may well be someone that you sit next to every day in the office or even in your lectures. And so not just what you might classify through your own internal prejudices, and these come out in all of us. We need to be very aware of them. It might not be someone who's got a substance abuse problem, although that commonly is associated with filthy and verminous premises. It could be a professional that you work with every day, and it's just that they've given up. They've really lost their will in their private lives, and the state of their property starts to deteriorate, and then it hits a certain tipping point at which they don't really feel that they can face dealing with it anymore, and so very often that's that sort of tipping point where it descends into a state of becoming really filthy and verminous. It gets to be a major problem. And often when you go in and do your clearance, that is very often a trigger point for them to start on a pathway of recovery, because you've taken away this massive weight they had on their mind to try to deal with it, and it can be a sort of springboard when they've got their cleaner house to be able to start dealing with other aspects of their own mental and physical well-being and the problems they have in their life. You don't get involved with their problems. You're not qualified to do that, so be very careful about that. Your role is to signpost to other service providers that can help them with their problem. So when you leave this case and you sign it off, what you should always do is make sure that you've made a number of referrals, or you signposted them to a number of other providers to pick them up once you've done your bit. Whilst you're doing this, bear in mind that what might be quite an sometimes amusing and certainly stimulating journey around their accommodation and see these awful conditions they've got themselves into. By the time you walk out of the premises, you're going to then be left thinking about the plight of that person in what is one of the richest countries in the world with one of the best welfare systems. And so that can really cause you some upset and distress, and so do take time to speak to relatives, keeping the details of the person confidential, of course, and the address, or colleagues in the office you may be able to be more open with in order to talk about how this has affected you. And finally, whilst you're dealing with the property, you're going to be dealing in quite a number of inquiries from nosy neighbours. And so you need to be polite but firm with them and move them on, because the person that you're dealing with, their premises that they're living in, is probably a source of significant shame for them. And so the last thing they want is the state of their premises to be made very public. So be as vague as possible when dealing with inquiries from neighbours or anyone else, and respect the privacy of that individual. And don't do anything that might link that individual to their properties if you're ever communicating about this elsewhere. So these are just some things to consider, and so do take a moment and replay this if you need to, because there's quite a